Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep on some pretty dark stuff.
Yeah.
Assassinations of John F. Kennedy,
Right.
Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert F. Kennedy. And
Right.
we've got a ton of material to dig into for this deep dive.
Yeah, we do.
Excerpts from Fair Play magazine,
Yes.
issue number 30,
It's a good one.
which,
Yeah.
if you're familiar with Fair Play,
Mm-hmm.
you know that they really get into
Absolutely.
all sorts of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it's a magazine that's not afraid to ask the tough questions.
Yeah, and I mean, this particular issue is a real grab bag.
Yeah.
You've got articles arguing for government involvement
Right.
in all 4 assassinations.
Mm-hmm.
You've got medical analysis of JFK's assassination.
Yeah, some really detailed stuff.
You've got updates on the Assassination Records Review Board.
It's a real snapshot of how people were thinking about these events back in the 90s.
It really is.
When this issue came out.
So
Yep.
I guess a good place to start would be with James W. Douglas's letter to the American people.
Yeah.
So his main argument is that the American government, driven by Cold War paranoia,
Right.
was actually behind all 4 of these assassinations.
Yeah, and he's not just throwing out accusations here.
Right.
He really goes into detail about how
Yeah.
each of these figures
Yeah.
posed a specific threat
Right.
to those in power at the time.
Okay, so for example,
Mhm.
he talks about JFK's plan to withdraw from Vietnam.
Yeah, which obviously didn't sit well
Right.
with the CIA and the military.
And then with Malcolm X,
Mhm.
he focuses on his growing international influence.
Yeah, and his potential to unite with Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine
Which has been huge.
if those two had joined forces?
Yeah.
What kind of movement they could created?
Yeah, it would
That would have been powerful.
a force to be reckoned with.
Absolutely.
And then you've got MLK. By the late 60s,
Mhm.
he was openly criticizing the Vietnam War
Right.
and planning the Poor People's Campaign.
Which was going to bring Washington, D.C. to a standstill.
Yeah, I mean, he was really challenging the
Yeah.
establishment.
Big time.
But then Douglas says something that I found really kind of disturbing, actually.
What's that?
He suggests that the American people are actually complicit
Oh, wow.
in these assassinations
Okay.
through our denial and refusal to even consider the possibility of government involvement.
Interesting.
And he even goes so far as to ask this question,
Yeah.
may I suggest the possibility to you and to myself
Okay.
that we are ruled behind the scenes by a benevolent fascism?
Wow.
We consent to it by a tacit agreement.
That's a heavy statement.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying we've become so comfortable with the official narrative that we're blind to the possibility
Yeah.
that there's something much more sinister going on beneath the surface.
You know, he also mentions this interview he did
Right.
with former Attorney General Ramsey Clark,
Look.
who seemed to acknowledge the possibility of government malfeasance in the JFK assassination.
Oh, wow.
But then was really hesitant to actually dive into it.
It's like he knew something was off,
Yeah.
but he wasn't willing to say it.
Right.
Well, let's get into some of the specifics here.
Okay.
Because there's another article in Fair Play
Mm-hmm.
that analyzes the medical evidence
Yeah.
in JFK's assassination.
Oh, yeah.
And it really raises some serious questions
It does.
about the whole magic bullet theory.
Yeah, that article is called "A Philadelphia Lawyer Analyzes the Shots, Trajectories, and Wounds,"
Okay.
and it's by this guy Vincent J. Salandria,
Right.
and he really gets into like the nitty-gritty of
Yeah.
the forensic evidence,
And like you said,
and it just doesn't add up
yeah, it doesn't add up.
with what the Warren Commission concluded.
And Douglas takes it a step further
Yeah.
and argues that there was a deliberate cover-up
Mm.
in each of these cases. He points to things like the burning of JFK's autopsy notes,
Yeah, that's a big one.
the alleged manipulation of photographic and X-ray evidence
That's right.
in both JFK and RFK's assassinations.
I mean, why would you destroy evidence
Exactly.
unless you had something to hide?
It's super suspicious.
Totally.
And then there's the destruction of Oswald's intelligence files.
Oh, yeah, that's still a huge mystery.
Right.
I mean, what was in those files?
And then you've got the LAPD
Yeah.
allegedly intimidating witnesses
Mm-hmm.
who claim to have evidence of a conspiracy in RFK's assassination.
And you can't forget about the
Right.
FBI's campaign against MLK.
Right. The COINTELPRO operation,
Yeah, that was just...
that was intense.
I mean, the fact that they sent him an audio tape
Right. Yeah.
of an extramarital affair
No, it's just
and a letter urging him to commit suicide.
awful.
It's like they were trying to destroy him.
Yeah.
Not just discredit him, but actually destroy him.
Yeah. And it's important to remember here that the House Select Committee on Assassinations actually concluded that a conspiracy was likely in MLK's murder.
So even the government admitted that something was fishy.
Yeah, this wasn't just some random act of violence.
Right. It seems like there was a coordinated effort to silence him.
Okay, so let's move on now to another aspect of this whole saga that I've always found really fascinating.
What's that?
The murder of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
It is.
So we've got this article in
Right.
Fair Play by Russ Tarby called Did Oswald Recognize Ruby? And she really dives into the photographic evidence and raises some really interesting questions
She does.
about their possible connection.
Yeah, and you've got some people like CBS reporter Dan Rather, who was actually there covering the JFK assassination.
Claiming that Oswald made eye contact with Jack Ruby moments before the shooting.
Yeah, like he recognized him.
Yeah.
But then you have Detective Jim Lavelle, who was actually handcuffed to Oswald at the time, saying that the lighting was so bad that it would have been impossible to recognize anyone in the crowd.
Yeah, and even Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry, in his memoir, mentioned that some witnesses wondered if Oswald recognized Ruby.
So clearly there was some doubt about the official narrative.
And then you've got photo analyst Bob Groden, who, in his book, The Search for Lee Harvey Oswald, captions a close-up photo of Oswald with this line.
Okay.
He seems to be thinking, what are you doing here, Jack?
Wow.
I mean, that's pretty suggestive.
It is.
It makes you wonder if there was more to their relationship than just a chance encounter.
That meets the eye.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's time to dive into
some of the other articles
in
this issue of Fair Play.
Right.
One that I found really intriguing.
What's that?
Was Arthur Croc's The Intra-Administration War in Vietnam.
Oh, yeah. That's a fascinating one.
I mean, it's wild to think that this was published in the New York Times.
In the New York Times.
And it's basically warning about the CIA going rogue.
And it was published just weeks before JFK was assassinated.
I know, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's like a premonition.
It really is.
He even suggests that the CIA might be plotting a coup to overthrow the government.
It makes you wonder if he knew something that the rest of us didn't.
Yeah, or maybe he was just picking up on these anxieties that were circulating in Washington at the time.
Yeah, but it really makes you think about who was really in control during that time.
Who's calling the shots.
Right, and it adds a whole other layer
to the
JFK assassination.
Yeah.
If Kroc was right. And the CIA was really operating as a rogue element.
Yeah.
Then the question becomes, were they involved in JFK's death?
Right, and if so, why?
Okay, so there's another article I
I'm
want to touch on before we move on.
All right.
Gary Aguilar's letter to the AMA.
Okay, so just to clarify for our listeners, the AMA is the American Medical Association.
Right.
And Aguilar is writing to them because he's concerned about some articles they published on JFK's autopsy in the Journal of the American Medical Association.
Right. Their flagship publication.
Exactly.
And he feels like they might have libeled a physician named Charles Crenshaw by publishing false information about his presence in JFK's trauma room.
Right. And then they refused to print a response from Dr. Crenshaw.
Oh, wow. So they wouldn't even let him defend himself.
Not only that, but Aguilar also points out that the JMA didn't address the critique of the JFK autopsy.
Right.
From the forensic consultants to the House Select Committee on Assassinations.
Right. The committee that concluded that a conspiracy was likely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They found some serious flaws in the original autopsy.
Right.
And the JMA just ignored it.
It's like they were more interested in protecting their own reputation than engaging in an open and honest debate.
Exactly.
And didn't Aguilar also point out that JFK's original pathologists refused to appear?
Yeah, that's right.
Before the Assassination Records Review Board?
Like they had something to hide.
Yeah. I mean, it's just super suspicious.
Totally.
But it's not all doom and gloom in this issue of Fair Play.
Yeah.
They've also got all these updates and letters to the editor.
Yeah, it shows you how much.
Which I think really highlight how deeply these events still resonate.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a real sense of community in these pages.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
In this first part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
But there's still so much more to unpack.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface.
So stay tuned for part 2.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're back. And I got to say,
yeah,
Douglas's argument that the government was behind all 4 of these assassinations is it's pretty unsettling.
It is.
But I have to admit, the way he lays it all out,
yeah,
it's hard to just dismiss it as just a conspiracy theory.
He makes some compelling points.
He does, and he goes into a lot of detail.
He does.
Especially when it comes to Malcolm X.
Yeah, he really challenges the idea that Malcolm X's assassination was just a result of infighting within the Nation of Islam.
Right. He brings up the fact that both the FBI and the CIA were extensively surveilling Malcolm X.
Oh, absolutely.
And that his message was becoming increasingly critical of the U.S. government.
Yeah, and he wasn't just speaking to American audiences either.
Right. He was gaining influence on the world stage.
Exactly. He was becoming a global figure.
Yeah. And then there's that quote from the North African diplomat who told Douglas that the CIA was beginning to murder its own citizens.
Chilling.
It's a chilling statement.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder how far the U.S. government was willing to go to silence dissent during the Cold War.
I mean, it makes you think about, you know, what else they might have been involved in.
Right. And Douglas even suggests that the government might have been behind the attempts to poison Malcolm X.
During his trips to Africa.
Yeah, during his trips to Africa.
I mean, if that's true,
it's intense.
That's pretty dark.
And he makes a similar argument about Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah, he emphasizes how King went from being a civil rights leader to someone who was openly criticizing the Vietnam War.
Yeah, and U.S. militarism as a whole.
Right, and the Poor People's Campaign.
Right, with its plan to disrupt the government in D.C.
I mean, that was seen as a direct threat by those in power.
And then there's the FBI's COINTELPRO operation against MLK.
Ugh. It's just brutal.
It's off.
Sending him that audio tape from the suicide letter.
It's like they weren't just trying to discredit him.
Yeah.
They were trying to break him.
Psychologically.
Yeah.
Totally.
And again, you know, we have to remember that the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded that King's assassination was likely the result of a conspiracy.
Even the government admitted that something was wrong.
Yeah. This wasn't just some random act of violence.
Nope.
Okay, so what about Robert F. Kennedy?
So Douglas argues that RFK was on track to become a very powerful figure, and he was openly challenging the status quo.
Right. He was critical of the Vietnam War.
Yeah, and he was talking about things like poverty and social justice in ways that were making the establishment very uncomfortable.
Okay, so Douglas believes that RFK was seen as a threat to the same power structures that had orchestrated the assassination of his brother, JFK.
Exactly.
And what about the evidence?
So he focuses on the inconsistencies in the official narrative and points to the LAPD's destruction of evidence and the possible involvement of individuals with ties to intelligence agencies.
It's like every time you dig deeper into these assassinations, you just find more questions than answers.
More questions than answers, for sure.
Yeah, and Douglas doesn't stop there.
He doesn't.
He even suggests that Sirhan, the man convicted of RFK's murder, might have been a patsy.
Okay, so he's saying Sirhan was either brainwashed or manipulated into carrying out the assassination.
I mean, it sounds crazy.
It does sound crazy.
But when you consider all the other alleged plots and cover-ups that Douglas has outlined,
it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility.
It's not.
If there was a conspiracy to kill RFK,
it
wouldn't be that far-fetched to think that they would use someone like Sirhan
to take the fall.
Exactly.
So basically, Douglas's argument is that the U.S. government, during the height of the Cold War, was so paranoid about losing power that it resorted to eliminating anyone it perceived as a threat.
Yeah, it's a pretty dark view.
It is a dark view.
Of American history.
Yeah.
But honestly, the more you learn about that era, the more plausible it seems.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And go back to Russ Tarby's article about Oswald and Jack Ruby.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's like a microcosm of the entire JFK assassination debate.
With all those conflicting accounts.
Yeah, with all these conflicting accounts.
And interpretations of the same event.
And his analysis of the photographic and video evidence of Oswald's murder.
It's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
You've got some people
who claim to see recognition in Oswald's eyes.
Yeah, right before Ruby shoots him.
Yeah, and then others who say it's just a trick of the light.
Right.
That you can't really read anything.
Into his expression.
Exactly.
And I mean, even today, people are still debating what those photos tell us.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that history is often subjective, that even when we have what seems like objective evidence, there's always room for interpretation.
Absolutely. And you can't forget the power of the media in all of this.
Oh, yeah.
Tarby mentions Dan Rather's narration of the Oswald shooting and how his dramatic presentation of the events really shaped how millions of people viewed it.
Yeah, it's amazing how much influence a single voice can have in shaping public opinion.
Especially in those days.
Right.
Before the internet and social media.
Right.
People really relied on those trusted news sources.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of interpretations of history.
Right.
Let's talk about Arthur Crocks.
Yeah.
The intra-administration war in Vietnam.
That's a wild one.
I know, it's crazy to think that this was published in the New York Times.
I know.
And it's basically warning about the CIA going rogue.
And it was published just weeks before JFK was assassinated.
It's like he knew something was going to happen.
Like a premonition.
Or maybe he was just picking up on those same anxieties and suspicions. That were circulating in Washington at the time. Yeah,
but it really makes you think about, you know, the power dynamic.
Right, who was really in control.
Yeah, exactly.
And it adds a whole other layer to the JFK assassination.
Right.
If Kroc was right and the CIA was really operating as a rogue element, then the question becomes, were they involved in JFK's death?
And if so?
And if so, why?
Exactly.
And it takes us back to Douglas's argument, which is essentially that there were powerful forces within the U.S. government that were willing to do whatever it took to maintain their power.
To hold on to power.
Even if it meant silencing those who disagreed with them.
At any cost.
Okay, so before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, let's revisit Gary Aguilar's letter to the AMA. I think this one speaks to a bigger issue that we see again and again, not just with these assassinations, but all sorts of areas.
What's that?
The reluctance of powerful institutions to acknowledge their mistakes. Or to admit.
Or to even admit that they might have been wrong.
Right. And Aguilar's critique of the J. Mays articles on JFK's autopsy is a great example of that.
They published information that was potentially libelous. And then they refused to print a retraction. Or even to engage with the critique from the House Select Committee.
On assassinations. It's like they were more concerned with protecting their image and maintaining the status quo than with getting to the truth.
The truth be damned.
And then you've got the fact that JFK's original pathologists refused to appear before the Assassination Records Review Board.
What does that tell you?
It definitely raises suspicions.
It does.
It's like they were afraid that if they spoke openly, they might reveal something.
That would blow the whole thing wide open.
Oh, yeah, and undermine the official narrative.
Exactly.
Or maybe they were just following orders, protecting those who were really in charge.
Right.
And that's the thing about these assassinations. They raise so many questions.
They do.
About power, about corruption, and about the lengths to which people will go to hold on to what they have.
To hold on to power.
Okay, so I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive and move on to the final act.
I am ready when you are.
So what can our listener expect in part 3?
Well, we'll be considering the wider implications of these events and exploring the impact these assassinations have had on American society and politics in the decades since.
Sounds intense.
We'll also discuss what fair play has to say about where we go from here.
I'm ready.
Okay.
All right, so we've spent a lot of time in the weeds, you know, with these assassinations.
We have.
We've looked at the evidence, the arguments, the theories. Now I'm kind of curious.
Okay.
What does it all mean for us today? What can we learn from all of this?
Well, one of the big takeaways for me is that we can't just blindly accept the official narratives. We got to be willing to question things, to dig deeper, to consider alternative perspectives.
And that's something that comes up again and again in fair play.
Absolutely.
This idea that there are forces at work trying to control the narrative.
Yeah, to keep certain information hidden.
Right. And it's not just about governments.
No.
Or intelligence agencies.
Right.
It could be corporations.
Yeah.
The media. Even cultural institutions.
Anyone with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo.
So what can we do about it? How can we become more discerning consumers of information?
It sounds simple, but I think it starts with just being aware that bias exists.
Yeah.
Everyone has a perspective.
Right.
And that perspective shapes how they present information.
Right.
Once you understand that, you can start to look for the telltale signs of bias.
Like what?
Things like cherry-picking data,
Okay.
using emotionally charged language, or presenting only one side of the story.
Right. And what about when we're dealing with historical events?
Yeah.
Like these assassinations, where there's so much conflicting information.
Right.
So many different interpretations.
So many different interpretations.
How do we even know where to begin?
I think it's important to look at the sources.
Okay.
Who's presenting the information?
Right.
And what's their agenda?
Right.
Are they relying on credible evidence or are they just speculating?
Okay. And it's also helpful
Yeah.
to look at the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
The historical context.
Yeah, what was happening in the world at the time.
Right. What were the political and social tensions?
Exactly, because understanding the context can really help you make sense of the event.
And I think it's also important to remember that history is not just about dates and facts.
Right.
It's about people.
Yeah.
Their motivations and the choices they made.
And sometimes those motivations are complex and contradictory.
It's rarely black and white.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's why these assassinations continue to fascinate us.
They do.
They force us to confront the messiness of human nature, the potential for violence and corruption.
The dark side of humanity.
Yeah, even in a society that prides itself on freedom and democracy.
Yeah. You know, and speaking of democracy, these assassinations really highlight how fragile it can be. You have these 4 incredibly influential figures, all of whom were challenging the status quo.
In their own ways.
Yeah, in their own ways.
And they were all silenced.
It makes you wonder, you know, if these figures had lived, would the course of American history have been different?
Would we be living in a more just and equitable society today?
It's impossible to know for sure.
Right.
But it's a question worth asking.
And it's a reminder that we can't take our freedoms for granted.
Absolutely.
We have to be vigilant to speak out against injustice and to hold our leaders accountable.
I think that's part of the legacy of these assassinations. They sparked a wave of activism and social change.
People started to question the government, to demand more transparency, and to fight for their rights.
And that spirit of questioning, that's something that's alive and well in fair play.
You can see it in the articles, the letters to the editor, the updates on the Assassination Records Review Board.
There's this persistent belief that the truth is out there and that we have a duty to keep searching for it.
And I think that's a powerful message.
It is.
It's a reminder that we can't just be passive consumers of information.
We have to be active participants in shaping our own understanding of the world.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what final thoughts would you leave our listener with?
I would say, don't be afraid to ask questions.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to challenge the official narratives.
Right.
And don't be afraid to seek out alternative perspectives.
Right. The more informed we are, the better equipped we are to navigate the complexities of our world.
Absolutely.
And to make a positive impact.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So, to our listener, thanks for joining us on this journey.
Thanks for listening.
Keep questioning.
Keep learning.
Keep learning.
And keep diving deep.
See you next time.